would like to welcome Tina McKeon, our board chair, as well as our sponsor for today with Kilpatrick Townsend, who will kick us off.
Thanks, Jason. Welcome to the keynote address for the first conference of Southeast Life Sciences. As Jason said, I'm wearing two hats. One is the co-chair of the organization and one is a partner at Kilpatrick Townsend. Kilpatrick Townsend is a leading general practice law firm with an intellectual property department that's laser focused on optimizing our clients' most valuable assets. Kilpatrick is a proud sponsor of the conference and in fact is proud of its long-standing representation of investors, universities, and companies both large and small in the life sciences industry. But whether I stand here on behalf of Kilpatrick Townsend or Southeast Life Sciences or both, I've landed a pretty sweet gig because I get to introduce Jeremy Levin as our keynote speaker. Dr. Levin is the current chair and CEO of Ovid Therapeutics, but that's not all. He's also the board chair of BIO, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, as we all know it. But that's not all either. Dr. Levin has a rich background and skill set. He's lived on 3 continents. He's a physician and research scientist by training. He's the former CEO of Teva, which is, as you know, a huge Israeli pharma company. And he formerly, not formally, but formerly had global responsibilities at both Bristol Myers Squibb and Novartis. And just to put a finer point on it, Dr. Levin's significance, he was named one of the most influential people in biopharma. So I believe Dr. Levin is uniquely positioned to talk to us today about the life sciences industry, both past, present, and future. And he's going to make some remarks, and then I get to ask him a few questions in a fireside chat format, which of course will be lacking both the fire and the fireside. But if you have questions, post them in the chat function, and I'll do my best to raise those during the chat. So Dr. Levin, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today, and we look forward to your remarks.
Tina, what a great pleasure it is to be here with you. And everybody, thank you for taking time today. I'd like to really ask you, please, today's format is designed to give you the chance to ask me any questions you like, quite literally anything. But I also want to start out today by thanking Southeast for doing this. This is special. The fact that you're creating something new, the fact that J&J came and sponsored this in the way they did, tells me something is really going on. And I can tell you also, as we talk through this, you're going to see a theme that I believe is absolutely crucial. And that is that the life sciences are not just important for our day-to-day. They are a strategic asset for the United States. And this is a really interesting week to be speaking to you. In actual fact, you know, Monday was a completely historic day. The announcement of the positive data from Pfizer's vaccines, and I'm happy to discuss that because we did a lot of work in that. And then, you know, for those of people like myself who've lived in really quite difficult countries, last week, and now, by the way, a proud citizen for many, many decades. Last week, we saw a wonderful demonstration of the democratic process. So it's only fitting, incidentally, that now you have this particular event today. And oh, by the way, for those of you who celebrate it, at the end of the week, there'll be the first day of, some of you may know this, it's Diwali. It's a festival which symbolizes the spiritual victory of light over darkness, good over evil, and most importantly, knowledge over ignorance. And I think that's the key that we ought to be thinking about. Facts, science, and medicine. And as I talk to you about this, think about I'd like to sort of break this into a couple points, and then Tina's going to come in, and I hope she's going to ask me some tough questions. I've also told her she can interrupt me if she really doesn't like what she's hearing. So hopefully I'll be careful of what I say, but not too careful. I want to talk to you first of all about biotech as it was, as it is today, and how I think it's going to flow in the future. I want to talk about bio as an organization and the changes that have occurred there. And then I also want to talk about some of the key things that we as an industry have to grapple with. And maybe you'll agree and you'll disagree with some of those, but at the end of the day, I'm going to keep on coming back to this very central issue: innovation and patience. Now, why am I doing this? Well, the bottom line is, having grown up as a physician, my life was changed many years ago when I was asked to run the first ever trial of a then unique, wonderful new medicine. It was a conversion of a venom from a snake into a new medicine, captopril. And I nearly killed my first patient. I was in the trial. I gave the injections IV, and the patient's blood pressure just dropped, and died right in front of me. That blood pressure went away. For the next 2 hours, I was saving that patient. From that moment, my life changed, because I wasn't just a doctor. I knew that the minute you gave a medicine to somebody, you changed their life. And that was decades ago. And yes, I'm getting a bit ancient, I know, but I still haven't lost that moment, the recollection of that moment. That moment changed me. Biotech, for me, was born then. And I learned at the time, I watched the entire industry grow up. Literally, when I came to the United States in 1986, I had the chance to watch the industry grow, become more and more focused on different areas, on agriculture, environment, food, and of course, the life sciences. And by the way, just in case you think that I don't see them interrelated, I see them completely related. You don't feed people, they die. You don't have a healthy environment, people die. If you don't have medicines, people die. And I think at the end of the day, what you ought to think about, in my mind, the way I think, at least I can offer you this framework, is that biotechnology is part of creating a healthy environment. And the healthy environment, from the broadest perspective, is one of the pillars of democracy. It is that which allows us to behave and function effectively. It's that which allows us to enjoy the cultural richness of our society. And it's that which allows us, at the end of the day, to build a healthy economy and to grow and to educate our children. And so when you think about biotech, don't just think about it as a new technology. Think about it as part of the democratic process. And then most particularly, as we've seen and we'll come back to perhaps, is how in a moment of crisis, biotechnology stands up and is counted. That's what's happening right here. That's what we saw with Pfizer. So biotechnology in the past was really an assembly of technologies growing up and understanding how you could use them. Multiple companies started up. And in many ways, the capital markets surrounding us became increasingly attracted to it. There weren't that many venture capitalists in 1986 who were interested in this area. Today, it's a completely different world. There are billions and billions and billions of dollars going into biotechnology. But the really big change structurally is not just the amounts of money or the fact that the capital markets now are receptive to a very much earlier stage projects, but actually that biotechnology has migrated from small companies into very large companies. The fact that J&J is sponsoring your life science conferences is an exact example of this. I can absolutely assure you that very few large companies were present in the space at all early on. They simply didn't recognize it. Now it's embraced as part of the norm. Pfizer using mRNA for the new vaccine, same as Moderna, very similar. So today, what we've seen is a convergence of the types of technologies that were so restricted in the last decades into the large companies. And that's really wonderful because it harnesses the power of the large companies with the innovation of the small companies, which remains the mainstay of innovation. After all, over 70% of new medicines come from small companies. That's a remarkable fact. And indeed, the revolution in immuno-oncology would never have happened. Today, it's the norm, right? Today, we say, gee, in January of this year, 50% of all clinical trials were immuno-oncology trials. 50%. In 2007, 3 trials. Medrex was the only serious company in that area. And when Bristol Myers acquired it, it was acquired against the backdrop of everybody saying, these old immuno-oncology doesn't work. That crazy biotech company, it'll never work. One large company after other walking away from immuno-oncology. 2007, 2008. By 2009, Bristol, having acquired Medrex, suddenly started to show that you had interesting results. From that moment forward, a decade later, half of the all investment in biotech was in oncology at the beginning of this year. Astonishing. But that's what the power of the big companies can do. And now we've gone on from that to cell therapies. And from cell therapies, we're going to go further, lots further. Very exciting future, in actual fact. So today, one of the most exciting things for me is to watch how large companies have synthesized, brought in the technologies, embraced them, and in many cases are improving on them or exploiting them to their very fullest. Now, one of the reasons I decided that I was going to come back into a small company was exactly that. I'd led Teva, a generic company, but I saw the flourishing role of biotech. I saw the innovation occurring. I saw what people were really thinking about, how they could be excited by a new change. It doesn't really, we had CRISPR. And CRISPR, by the way, migrated into agriculture, migrated into food. We are really using these technologies in a way that are quite remarkable. And it crosses everything. And if you're asking for solutions in environment or food or agriculture, biotechnology will definitely provide many of them. Not all, but many. So in talking to you today, you say, well, you're a big company guy. You rose up in Bristol. You went off and did generics. And then you came back to innovative company. Boy, it's been tough. You don't get much schooling in being a life sciences CEO in a giant company where everybody does everything for you and every minute of the day is scripted. In a little company like Ovid, like many of you, I put on my knee pads and I go and ask for money. It's not fun. I don't like it. I'll be honest. On the other hand, I have in my mind only one thing that matters. Remember that patient that nearly died? That concept that if you give a pill to somebody, if you give a medicine to somebody that you can change their life, you betcha. That is worth gold to me. And that is what I will do all my life. And that's why Ovid is there, because we are tackling problems that nobody else has ever tackled. And it's fun to watch. When we got into Angelman's disorder in 2014, there were no companies, none. We showed a positive trial result in 2018 and boom, everybody says we can do this. Now there are 14. This is just like immuno-oncology. The neurosciences are going to explode. They're going to explode. When you show you can do something, others follow. And that's great. I'm not worried about competition. I'm worried about the patient. That's what matters. It's the patient that matters. And that's what we're here for. So I came back into the industry and decided to help. And one of the things I wanted to help was Bio. Bio, wonderful organization, an organization that was focused for many years on driving innovation in patients. And then as the dialogue, as Congress split, as increasingly it became impossible to have dialogues in Congress, you had Republicans, you had Democrats, and they each saw each other as the enemy, as opposed to helping patients, as opposed to thinking about what could help individuals, those that depend on us. They were busy fighting with each other. Ridiculous. I have no time for that, neither should you. They're our representatives. They need to find a middle road. It's absurd. Actually, it makes me quite upset that they cannot look to you and me and ask the question, how can we help you? How can we help those who elected us into office to be together? But they didn't. But I could see in bio the ability to synthesize unity. And in unity, there's strength. If we focused on patience and innovation, so we can drive the moral imperative of forever being able to change the minds of the legislators and getting them and encouraging them to believe in who we are and what we are. And that's what's critical to me. That's what should be critical to you. And that's what is the foundation of our industry. And as I think about it, and as I offer you my thinking on this, my goals would be not to tell you what was right in bio, but to take action within bio to change it. The first step in that was to recruit a doctor, a physician, somebody who was a scientist, who understood and had compassion for patients to lead it. Dr. Michelle McMurray-Heath is exactly that. A person who comes from a diverse background, somebody who's a physician who understands medicine, is a scientist in her own right, has lived in the regulatory authorities in the FDA, and really knows what she's doing in running the organization. And I'm super excited to have Michelle now running that organization. It is going to be different from the past. We're not going to ignore the fact that Congress is still split, that the Senate doesn't seem how to dialogue easily, and let alone to dialogue with the White House. Nevertheless, the rock that bio will stand on is thinking about patience and innovation. And any policy that allows that to flourish, allows that to grow, is the policy that we will adopt. That is the policy that will drive, and we hope that as we think about the Congress and the Senate and the White House, that when the next administration comes in, they listen carefully and thoughtfully and understand where we come from, which is exactly that. Building healthcare as a foundation of our democracy, as a foundation of our national strategic imperative, as a foundation that we can offer the world the ability to look at America and say, by golly, that is the gold standard. They are the leaders around the globe. They're making a difference. And now let's just talk about a couple things which I'm sure affect all of you and affect me. I find this difficult. I have to confess. We face an absolutely unconscionable situation. More than 10 million Americans affected with COVID. We're tracking to 300,000 dead, families, and by the way, I believe it'll be many more before we're finished. There was absolutely no organization behind attempting to attack and to fight this back from the administration. Anybody who says otherwise is just denying the facts. You can see it. How come America is the worst prepared country of the world? And the answer is very simple. In January, it was denied. In February, it was regarded as a political problem. And by March, people were actually starting to try and ignore it while causing chaos within the FDA, CDC. This was not the way we can, this is not an example of how you tackle an enemy. When you tackle an enemy, you give the same message, you unite, and you fight it frontally. You tell people transformingly, this is what we're going to do. That message did not come through. And you know that, and I know that. But what did happen, what was magic, is that bio, first of all under Jim Greenwood, and then with Michelle, galvanized. Starting from January 1, when there were no programs in COVID. Today, there are over 800. 150 plus vaccines, 150 plus new antivirals, and tons of programs looking at older medicines. We are going to beat this, but we're going to beat it because biotechnology came around and put its shoulder behind it. And now we've got Warp Speed, run by one of the people I most respect, Monsef Salui. We know that we can lick this. But what's really interesting is the 6 different technologies that are being adopted for the new vaccines, of which 3 are kind of standard and old, probably will work, looking forward to that. But the 3 others are brand new and are biotech driven, and they were, as some of you well know, mRNA as a medicine took years to come to fruition. But it was the persistence of science believing in the fact that you can transform and focus on innovation and get there. So it's a really optimistic moment. I believe that by the end of the year, we'll have our first vaccines approved. And by the middle of this forthcoming year, I am very optimistic that it will be distributed, even though it's very tough to build the cold chain to handle some of these. We're there. So with that, I spent a little time more than I'd expected to, but I want you to take away the message. Biotech is a strategic asset of this nation. Biotech is the thing that can combat not just COVID-19, but, oh, by the way, the next one. And in the meantime, it's going to deliver new technologies that will allow us to explore immunology, allow us to explore antivirals. It's an exciting explosion. And boy, am I delighted that I got back into biotechnology. What a pleasure it is, and what a pleasure it is to speak to you. Tina, over to you now. I think you should stop me speaking, otherwise I'll continue forever.
No, I could listen forever. Yeah, wow, that was quite inspirational. For those of you just tuning in, there is some political turmoil in Washington these days. And Dr. Levin, what do you see that as meaning to the future of the life sciences industry?
The future of the life sciences industry depends on coherent, constant thinking. What is required is that any policymaker, any policy decisions have some continuity. In the absence of that continuity, it's extremely difficult for the industry to be able to adjudicate which way to go. More importantly than even that is the absolute requirement that there be zero, let me underline the word, zero, political interference in the FDA, the CDC, and NIH, and all the science bodies that we depend on. There can be no decision that is politically motivated in either a vaccine, a new medicine. If that is allowed to continue, then America will become just like the dictatorships we've seen around the world, where suddenly Putin, for example, puts out a vaccine and tries it out on his people. Can you imagine? Let's try out a vaccine on a couple million Americans. Just let's see if it works. Outrageous. That is not us. We are the gold standard. We are the leaders in the world because we focus on medicine and we focus on science.
So what about issues with regard to things like trade disruptions? How do you see that affecting the life sciences industry?
So Tina, it's very important. The life sciences industry here, I'm going to use writ large, including not just health, but also agriculture. Mm-hmm. America is one of the largest agricultural producers in the world, if not the largest agricultural producer, also the largest exporter of agricultural products. The world depends on us for food and for health. We produce 70% of the medicines, and we produce the vast bulk of foods that we export, and certainly the vast bulk of proteins that are exported around the world. Trade, when we go into trade disputes, we need to acknowledge that what we really are dealing with here are some vital forms of economic sustenance, not just for the Americas, but also for the globe itself. And so I view all trade agreements where we can enhance and embellish the ability for one, innovation to come to America, in other words, where we can actually import skilled people, or secondly, that we're allowed to actually export the real fantastic products that we've developed in biotech, in the life sciences, and in agriculture. These are really important. So we've had some great successes, by the way, in agriculture, and I would hope that we'd have the similar successes. What we can't do is import the kind of ideas of pricing that people have abroad. We cannot do that, and I'll explain that if you'd like to go into that. But what we do need to do is break down barriers to allow the best of the best scientists to come to this country, as they've always done,
And how do you think that the State Departments and the federal granting agencies, their approach to foreign influence on federally funded research, how do you think that's affected the industry?
Do you know, that's very important. It is absolutely unacceptable that any foreign nation fund United States science with the intent to steal it, period. Unacceptable. That is something we need to defend against, and we need to be jolly sure that that never happens. And as far as I'm concerned, we need to provide all authorities the ability to prevent that happening. At the same time, legitimate investment where people want to drive innovation in this country should be encouraged and should be permitted. So I think there's a fine balance between bringing down a hammer on those bad actors and encouraging those who we really want to be our partners to learn from, and to learn from them, and for them to learn from us. But the one thing's for sure, innovation crosses borders, and America has borders which, America's created more innovation than anybody else, and will continue to do so if we encourage people to be respectful of our rights, and at the same time to take advantage of what's here.
So you mentioned the global aspects of the life sciences industry. Are there lessons that the US life sciences industry could learn from other countries? And if so, what are they?
That's a really interesting question. I didn't know, I wasn't expecting that.
I didn't warn you about that one, but you said I could ask you anything.
You're right, that's fun. You know, I'll give you a thought. Where I was trained in science, which is in Oxford University, I was basically thrown into a laboratory and said, go and work and then come back in 3 years' time. Today, that doesn't work. Today in the NIH and elsewhere, you basically have large research machines where you have a PI, there are tens of postdocs, and you follow conventional thinking. The best science is unconventional. So if you wanted to ask me one thing, I think the degree that I would like to ask the NIH and other academic centers is allow some really just straightforward, crazy ass thinking. Stuff that you wouldn't normally do. Something that a scientist who's just smart will go and explore. It doesn't have to be all of the science, but allocate a portion of the funds to do things which are completely exploratory and not dependent upon large groups, because out of that will come brilliance. By the way, the mRNA work came from exactly that. Remember, the scientists who invented this were demoted years ago. They were demoted. And their brilliance, they will get a Nobel Prize for what they did.
We used to say that it was the graduate student that would try something that everybody else knew wouldn't work, and they would get it to work because they didn't know better. How is the US doing with getting new people to come into the life sciences industry with creative thinking?
Well, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, we've seen exactly the opposite. We've seen a net drain of people from the United States as the administration has raised walls of immigration. They've done so in a very haphazard fashion. And the consequence of that is that some of the top scientists have fled the country. And I mean that they've gone. They've gone to China, they've gone back to India, they've gone back to Europe. And many are rethinking whether they should come to this country. Now, this is not good because you want the best of the best to come here. Some may go back eventually, but the vast majority who are really good will come and stay. And when they do come and stay, that strengthens America hugely.
And the industry as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Tina, there are a couple of questions that popped up. Do you want me to have a go at a couple of them?
Sure. You can see them. I can't see them yet.
I can. Dan. Hey, Dan, this is Dan Aramian who's asked a question. Dan, when you get a question from Dan, you know you got a problem because Dan has been around he's seen biotech nearly as long as I have. And he asks, how can biotech prepare for the next pandemic? So I think, Dan, the answer is really simple. Do what we did last time. We actually started to learn from H1N1. We knew about it. We knew how to sequence. So one of the real reasons that we're able to get going on this pandemic was the understanding the sequence of the coronavirus like that. And from sequence, you really got the programs going. But what we didn't learn and what we need to learn is the following. Number one, we need to absolutely empower the CDC to have a full-blown epidemiological approach to understanding public health in this. That was gutted in this pandemic. Number two, we need to understand that manufacturing for these different vaccines need to learn from what we've gone through now in warp speed, how to manufacture, how to distribute. We better put that in place. You don't have to have everything, but you need the playbook put in place. Number three, we need to have learned at the FDA, and I'm sure they will do, how to assess very rapidly. So biotech is not just biotech prepare. It's actually the industry writ large prepare, because in addition to those that I've described, the other stakeholders include the payers, the Health and Human Services writ large, and the White House. Why? Because you got to communicate. You got to talk to the nation. They have to have trust in what's going on. They have to understand that there's a process. They have to understand that coming to them is something that will help them in their anguish. And the fact that there are 300,000 dead, or will be, is completely unacceptable. That's one thing I want to take away from this. Unacceptable. So if we don't learn the price that those people have paid, if we don't learn from their deaths, then I think shame on us. So Dan, I'm really ready to roll up my sleeves and provide any kind of feedback that people are requesting to learn from this, because all of us have it. Every single company of the 800 programs is a lesson in each one. And in my little town, I'm here in New Milford, Connecticut, I will teach everybody, and I do every week at the town council, I teach them about the vaccines. I want the whole town to know about it so they have confidence that when something happens, they're going to be there. They're going to understand why to take it, when to take it, how to take it. So that's one question. The other one is from, if I may do, Tina, I'm just reading them if you can't see them for the moment.
I can see them now, but that's okay. Keep going.
Okay, the second one is from Jennifer, and you'll forgive me. I think it's Alapadipo. You'll pardon my spelling and my pronunciation. I've got a strange accent anyway, so I probably massacred it there. But anyway, Jennifer, I think the question that you've asked is, how do you engage with large companies and what works well? Look, it's really difficult. First of all, you are going to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince. Let me be very clear. Large companies have different approaches. They're invisible to you. You can't see what they're doing. You do need to assume that they may or they may not be interested in your technology. However, my recommendation to you is really simple. Take a look at their websites. Don't approach a single one until you've done that. Do your homework. Look at every single one of those. Then If you can see that they've done a deal with a company, a smaller company, talk to them. Don't talk to the big company, talk to the little company first and ask, excuse me, not how you did a deal, but can you please tell me, do you know if they have an interest in different areas? And if so, was there somebody who is specially attuned, an individual who may not be interested in what I'm doing, but who can actually tell me in the company, are they interested? And that's the way to work it. Because you need that human contact. You need to get rid of the veil of these big companies. They are huge.
Let me ask you another question. You mentioned hiring Michelle McMurray-Heath. For a local plug on the Southeast, she's an MD, PhD from Duke. Very impressive resume. She's also a woman of color. And she's been somewhat outspoken already about disparities in healthcare. And I wonder how that strategically affects how bio sees its role in that regard.
Well, just to be very clear, it was one of the reasons that we brought Michelle on. If we look back at clinical trials over the years, what you'll see overwhelmingly in the long distant past was, first of all, it wasn't so much a question of trials being run with a vast diversity. To the contrary, it was young white males who were in the trials. And it was then it was middle-aged males. And this is the white males. This was not a good idea, because what this basically said is you were developing a medicine for males who were either middle-aged or younger. You were ignoring women. Trials that didn't have women in them, for heaven's sakes. This was extraordinary. Why? The statement was, at the time, I remember this, well, you've got to be careful because depending upon how their hormones work, you'll get this strange reaction to the drug. Excuse me, that's what drugs are meant to do. They are for all of us, not just for men. And then you have the situation where you have different populations, Hispanic, African Americans, Asian. Each one of them has different backgrounds in medical needs. And so it's absolutely essential that the biotech world of today understand exactly who they're dealing with. And in recruiting Michelle, we were confident that we had a representative who could see all dimensions, every part of this industry, every part of the types of patients who might benefit, and would encourage policies that would address a broad, if not the broadest spectrum of people. So that's why I was very pleased and that she put a name forward, and surprised and delighted. I can say to you that we looked at over 40 different candidates. The team that was pulled together to do this recruiting we knew that I took the chairmanship under the understanding that we would recruit somebody new. And not because Jim had failed, but because Congress no longer was able to deal with a Jim, basically. Jim was a consensus-building Republican ex-senator, ex-congressman who knew everybody on both sides. And as he went through his incredibly successful 15 years, so Congress became less successful and separated. And suddenly the voice that could reason with them was no longer there. The voice that could try and make a difference was somebody that was different. We had to focus on patients and innovation. And in order to do that, Michelle was exactly it. And after looking at the 40 different individuals, it was myself, Paul Hastings, who's the vice chairman and will assume my role next year in June, and John Mariganori, who wasn't in my role previously. The three of us were the team that reviewed everybody, and we went in with no bias, except you had to have somebody that understood patients and innovation. And by golly, 2 minutes after starting talking to Michelle, we knew we had the person for the role.
A very cool hire, very cool hire. She's also spoken out about drug pricing and regulation of drug pricing. Do you want to talk about that?
I always don't. I'd never like talking about regulation of drug pricing. I leave the vast majority of that to the other organization, pharma.
Fair enough.
But
move on. Then let's talk about biosimilars.
There we go. Biosimilars I'm really keen to talk about. So I think biosimilars are critical in our concept. Now, why do I say that? You'll smile a little bit, but many years ago, I was sent, when I was in Novartis, I was sent to address bio and tell them that biosimilars were critical and important for the industry. Now, we're talking when the dinosaurs roamed, because I was in Novartis then. However, I was told by the then CEO of bio, the then chairman of bio, in front of hundreds, that I was nigh the devil incarnate, that biosimilars were going to destroy innovation, that biosimilars were here to undermine everything that was existing. The minute somebody told me that, I knew that, in fact, this is something I would carry a torch for years. Why? Because it was clear to me, biosimilars weren't going to just be antibodies. Eventually, it would be cell, and by golly, certain proteins. And so it wasn't just a small molecule going to be a generic, which was Hatch-Waxman has defined very well. You were going to have a flood of new technologies from biotech, a flood. And the answer to dealing with this was not to ignore it. It was to embrace it and to understand how we were going to do it. Well, fast forward a couple decades and we still hadn't done this. But now we are, for the first generation of biosimilars. This is really important to us. We must put a clock against a biologic such that it can't be a forever franchise, such that you will see a massive drop in the pricing of that particular entity when it goes into its natural progression of being a biosimilar. Because if we don't work this out now, we have a couple of problems facing us. It's not antibodies, simple ones. We have tens of PD-1s coming along. We have other antibodies coming in the whole cancer revolution. We have proteins coming. We have cell therapies coming. We have gene therapies coming. And if we don't begin to understand the guardrails around how we're going to deal with this in the future, then we are going to face a massive problem in the public's eye, because you'll have companies who will actually say, I'm going to charge anything because I own this. Nobody else can do it. That's not true. You can do it. And I'll give an example. If you really believed in this and you really said, my cell is my unique cell and nobody else can do it, well then great. You have two choices. After time X, you can drop the price and make it a biosimilar. Or two, if you're really smart, you say to everybody, hi folks, I'm going to keep this in my plant. I'm going to keep producing it. I'll be your manufacturer. You can distribute this. We're not going to bother. We're not going to send sales and marketing on this, but it's going to be the same medicine that we produced in the past. There are different ways of doing this. You don't have to, we do need to solve it. And I feel very, very strongly, Tina, any attempt to block this, any attempt to slow it down is nothing short of something that bio will and should and will oppose.
Fair enough. Now, well, let's switch just a little bit. What about digital health and personalized medicine in an era where there's more and more focus on privacy and data protection?
Boy, such an important question. Digital health is here to be with us and in many different ways. And let me just give you one that really excites me. The idea that you can run in the COVID era, you've had to run clinical trials with people at home, which means you've had to establish digital means of measuring them at home, which means that, by the way, forever clinical trials are going to change. But there's a huge advantage to that. Not only do you have digital ways of measuring at home, you also have the advantage of having people in their natural environment. That's so cool. And now you're measuring medicines in their natural environment. However, we do need to acknowledge that the data that is taken in digital health needs to be protected. There needs to be rules, regulations, there needs to be guidelines on this. And just as they are on medical information of any kind, we need to have protections put around it.
You talked a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. What do you see as the long-term effects of the pandemic on the life sciences industry?
The couple things that I said probably may have run a little bit. I passed over them too fast. Sorry. The first is that, remember what I said? I said that at the beginning of the year, there were no investments. There were over 50% of all the investments in the industry is in cancer. Between now and then, 9 months later, we're in a whole different place. 10 months later, we're in a place where, in fact, huge amounts of capital have poured into a completely different area. So one lasting effect is the primacy of cancer research has been reduced. Effectively, you could have said that the biotech industry was the cancer industry. Now, that's not a good thing to be, because you need to have new cardiac drugs. At the beginning of the year, there was only like 2 or 3 programs. These pretty cool ones have come out since then. But cardiology needs to be addressed, not just cardiology. We now see, thank heavens, the work that AstraZeneca just did in completely new area of in asthma, affecting millions of us. I want to see more. So I think what you're going to see is, as people understand immunology and COVID, and they really dig into what COVID has done, we're going to see a lot of different therapeutics. And, I would hope that you get disorders like lupus, which have been so intractable, get a real shot at new thinking. All of the other viruses that we kind of ignore and we accept, I hope that will have an impact on it. And so I'm very hopeful there'll be many spin-offs from COVID that will help stimulate new thinking.
And sticking with the cancer theme, just for one more moment, immuno-oncology. I know you were instrumental in the acquisition of Medarex when you were at Bristol Myers. What do you see continuing in immuno-oncology? So,
yes, I really feel enormous satisfaction of having the opportunity to work in Bristol at the time. And it was a very interesting moment, 2007, 2008. Bristol was either going to get sold or it was going to build. And the Medarex acquisition was not exactly a consensus. People didn't want to focus on the innovation that it might breed, but rather the products that it had. And its products hadn't yet shown that they were working. And everybody else was saying it didn't work. So the lesson from that moment was, be prepared to stick your neck out. As a couple of us, myself included, who simply went and beat on the table and said, we need to buy Medarex and get it going. So I think at that moment, the world opened up. Once we had the first CTLA-4 antibody that showed you could really tackle melanoma, and then from melanoma you go to all these other areas using the PD-1s. But I think it's only the beginning. I think this is only a teaching of what might be. And I think what's great about immuno-oncology is that once people embraced it, all sorts of little shoots came out. That's why I feel confident about the COVID. You can't necessarily predict where these shoots are going to go, but they're going to flourish. And so if I had to predict where we'd be, you're going to see combinations that are going to have a radical effect on breast cancer, radical effect on lung cancer, and radical effect on bowel cancer, the big ones. I'm a little not yet happy with what I've seen in CNS cancers, but I think we have a good shot there.
You also mentioned, and I know that Ovid is involved in some neurological therapies. How do you see that exploding? You mentioned that. What's next?
Well, I think from, Ovid's pivotal phase 3 data is coming up this quarter, and that's 6 years of labor. So if we do, if we're successful, then I will be thrilled to have had the opportunity to bring the first ever medicine to patients with Angelman's disease, all, whatever it is, 23 to 25,000 families across the United States. I think, however, what's really interesting is medicines like the one we're looking at teach you about the brain. And in the case of Ovid, for example, there's a whole area of brain physiology called tonic inhibition, which will open up. It has started to open up. The idea that you could actually address this area, which describes a physiology, much like blood pressure reflects what's going on inside your cardiovascular system. So tonic inhibition is the ability to distinguish between signal and noise in your brain. And there are all sorts of disorders which are affected by this, all sorts of disorders. And learning from what we've done in Ovid, others will build on that, and perhaps hopefully we will build on it and find different disorders that are addressable. I think also it's really a shame to have seen this week the work that was so elegantly done at Biogen and then so roundly rejected by the AdCom. I think we need to ask a different kind of question. Are we set up to deal with that kind of innovation at the FDA? And I hope we are. I've got a great respect for Dr. Dunn, great respect for the leadership at the FDA. And I think that as we look at the CNS, that is the next area. That is the area that's going to crack open. Biogen tried with theirs. Hopefully they'll continue, and hopefully they'll have a good dialogue with the FDA and it'll be successful. But people like ourselves are going to move forward in the niche areas, will bring solid results, and that will encourage more and more and more people. Remember, melanoma was an orphan cancer. Angelman's is an orphan disease of the brain. You learn from these sentinel disorders and you start to open up the brain.
Well, I could ask a million questions, and I've asked a lot of them, and you've been very patient, so much appreciate that. I think it's a lot of lessons for many of us here, but I'm told that I have to proceed with a peaceful transfer of the stage.
Do you have a transition?
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. I'm so glad to hear that.
So I know, right? I'm going to be a grown-up. So Dr. Levin, I've thoroughly enjoyed your comments today. I'm confident our audience has as well. Thank you for being our very first keynote speaker for the Southeast Life Sciences. And I really appreciate both that and your role in promoting the life sciences industry in the US and worldwide. We hope you'll come back.
Tina, my pleasure, and thank you. And I hope I'll do it in Charleston. I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, next year.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, and do enjoy the time and celebrate the successes of this week.
Thank you. And I'm going to fill our audience in on a little bit of housekeeping. The conference planning committee wants to hear your thoughts about this session as well as every other session. Feel free to critique Dr. Levin, but not me. You'll find a short survey in the event details for the session at the virtual platform. We're excited about the rest of the week. We have some great content coming up today. Our next general session is going to answer a question that's perfect for 2020. The question is, are you about to board the Titanic? So this panel is going to start in a couple of minutes at 2 o'clock. You should launch that session from the main agenda on the virtual platform. After that, you'll see that we've got a networking break at 3 o'clock, so please stick around for that, and we can talk about what Dr. Levin shared with us. And we can also talk about the Titanic if you want to. So thank you all, and especially Dr. Levin, for joining us today.
Real pleasure. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.